One of the pillars of Kenya's foreign policy is something we call peace diplomacy. All right, it's one of the pillars of our foreign policy. It's peace diplomacy, and our peace diplomacy pillar, Kenya endeavors to be a region of peace, to be a purveyor of peace within the region. No wonder we have so many. We have the Dadaab refugee camp, the Kakuma refugee camp. We welcome so many refugees on our soil because we are a haven of peace. Other countries within the region view us as a haven of peace.
And we even send our peace missions.
Exactly, where we send our soldiers in the army, we sent our police force to Haiti to go and pursue peace. We've sent our military on a number of UN peacekeeping missions. Kenya is always tapped by the UN requested to provide soldiers for peace, for peace missions, peacekeeping missions. So Kenya, our peace diplomacy, you see now, that peace diplomacy is our strategy, is a pillar for Kenyan foreign policy. How do you know whether your foreign policy is working or not? The feedback you're getting from outside. If you get negative feedback, you know there's something you're doing that is not right.
And you're getting that at this time?
Yes, we are currently getting. Say you see bid, and the Kenyan candidate Raila lost to Mahmoud Yusuf from Djibouti. Number one, the takeaway is, if you look at the voting patterns, it means within Africa, and these are just lessons for the entire continent, within Africa, Africa is still divided along regional blocks and language. Those are two divisive factors within Africa. In the sense that Francophone countries voted for the Djibouti candidate because he's French speaking. A number of Anglophone countries voted for Raila because he's English speaking. That is one layer. And Tshisekedi, remember, DRC is a member of the East African community and a member of SADC. So SADC took a position against Kenya. It was a protest vote against Kenya. So it may not be about Raila Odinga, the candidate. It is about the position that Kenya took on some of these issues.
Going by the number of visits made by Raila Odinga and his campaign team to foreign capitals, he was expected that he would win the AUC elections. But he faced humiliation, especially by the regional bloc factor. And that opened a lot of conversation and points of concern about Kenya's foreign policy and relations. To really understand what entails foreign policy, we are lucky to be joined by Dr. Edgar Githua. Karibu sana, Daktari.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
How are you today and how is your year so far?
I'm well today. Thank you for having me on your show. The year has begun well, all right. There is a lot to learn from it so far, many lessons. And I'm looking forward to today's discussion to try and unpack and explain some of these issues.
All right.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Kenya Explained and I am your host, Esther Nyonje. So Daktari, straight into it, maybe you can start by telling us more about yourself and what you do for service in this country.
All right, thank you so much. So my name is Dr. Edgar Githua. I have a PhD in international relations. I'm an international relations, peace, security, diplomacy expert. That's my area. I teach at university level, and supervise and do research around the same. So I think that's what I'm trying to do to build a nation and to just help in this world of international relations. Yeah.
You're doing good at it.
Yes.
And we are lucky to have you today to break down these jargons that we hear about and might not understand in foreign policy. And now straight into it, how would you explain foreign policy to a layman?
Thank you. That's a very nice question. Yeah, foreign policy, to the layman, I'll try and use simplified language, but in essence, foreign policy, these are the strategies and the goals and the agenda a country has in how it is going to maneuver and deal with other countries. In layman's terms, it's how you relate with other people, how all individuals relate with one another. There is, for example, in your group of friends, in your circle of friends, there are friends who have a different type of temperament. There is someone who is an introvert, who is very quiet. So when you're dealing with them, you know how to approach them. And then there's someone who is hot-tempered. We have cholerics, those ones who are hot-tempered and domineering and who get angry quickly. So when you're dealing with them, you know how to approach them.
All right.
So to a nation state, to a country, a foreign policy is a set of goals. And the set of goals it aims to pursue. and the strategy, the blueprint, the how to. How are we going to deal with our neighbors? How are we going to deal with all these countries? Because foreign policy is based on interest. What do I want to get? All nation states, all countries in the world have what they want to achieve, have things they consider to be sacred to them, have an aim, a goal. So foreign policy is that roadmap, that agenda of how you're going to do it, how you're going to approach. The way Kenya is going to deal with Uganda is not how Kenya is going to deal with Tanzania. It's not how we're going to deal with China or Iran or the United States of America. That is basically foreign policy. So you must have an idea of how you're going to navigate and how you're going to pursue your interests and how you're going to navigate. That is what we call foreign policy. And having said that, it means foreign policy is not static. It keeps on changing. Because just like human relations, your friends Esther today, 10 years from now may not be your friends because your interests have changed. You have grown, your higher order thinking, your interests have changed, what you're pursuing in life has changed. So as you grow in life and as your circle of friends change, you keep on making new friends. Your foreign policy, if you are a country, changes because of the new interests that have come into your life. How you want to approach it, you start asking yourself, I want to get to point A or to point B. I'm at point A, I need to get to point B. Who among my friends can help me to get to point B? And even if all of them can help me to get to point B, which of my friends is best placed to help me to get to point B without too much stress? You find yourself aligning your interest more with those friends. You find yourself becoming closer to those kinds of friends. So foreign policy is not static. It keeps on changing, though it is anchored on a particular, like Kenya has particular pillars that anchor our foreign policy, but foreign policy is not static. That's what we say in the world of diplomacy. So it is the set of goals and aims that a country wants to pursue and the strategy it lays in her trying to pursue that. So if we want something from Iran, how are we going to get it from Iran? What will they need from us? How should we position ourselves to get it from Iran? Those kinds of things.
That is very profound.
Yeah.
What determines an effective foreign policy?
Based on what I've said, an effective foreign policy is a foreign policy that enables a country to achieve its interest at any given time. We can say you have effective foreign policy if, as a nation state, the roadmap you have created in trying to relate with other countries is successful. So, for example, if you've been trying to increase or grow in the world of economics, you increase your economy or trade for that matter, and you have identified big countries out there that are big on trade and you want to create or have a strong relationship with them, the fact that you are succeeding in them being able to assist you or you being able to trade with them, we can say that your foreign policy is successful. So an effective foreign policy, number one, helps a country achieve its interest. We can say foreign policy is effective to the extent it enables a country to achieve its interest. So the key thing to keep, because you're telling me you're talking to lay people, the key thing to keep at the back of our minds is that what do you want and how are you planning to get it? So you measure your foreign policy success or failure by whether you are achieving what you set out to achieve. So the more you are achieving, we can say, yes, you have successful foreign policy. If you are not, as a good nation state, you go back to the drawing board and ask yourself, where are we making a mistake? What can we adjust? I still need that thing from that country or from that region, that part of the world. Why aren't I successful? So you now start reorienting your foreign policy. You work backwards. Go back to your drawing board so that you're able to be effective in how you plan to do it.
It's very interesting to hear that foreign policy is static. Are there any countries in Africa or in the global scope that you consider have that effective policy? That one you look and say, this is it.
Yeah. So I said foreign policy is not static. It doesn't, static means remains in the same place. It is dynamic. Foreign policy is dynamic for most countries. It has elements of continuity and change. There are certain things about foreign policy that remains the same, and there are certain aspects that has got to change because of our countries. In international relations, we say we live in a very dynamic world. Things are always changing. People who are friends today may not be friends tomorrow because their interests have clashed. So we can be friends with you, Esther, so long as our interests align. We are after the same thing. But one day, unfortunately, we find ourselves at loggerheads because what I want to achieve and what you want to achieve is colliding. Or we are after the same thing and it is limited. And being selfish as human nature, the way we are selfish, we say in realism that countries, nation states are selfish, human beings are selfish. You find that we might quarrel because all of us want the same thing. So turning to Africa, if you want to look at countries whose foreign policies that have been effective, I mean, largely it is not a question that I can really pinpoint and say that this country's foreign policy has been very good. What I will say is that all countries within Africa, their foreign policy has been as effective to the extent that it has helped them to achieve their interests. So that in mind, I can pick our example like Kenya. Let's just take Kenya for example. One of the pillars of Kenya's foreign policy is something we call peace diplomacy. All right, it's one of the pillars of our foreign policy. It's peace diplomacy, and our peace diplomacy pillar, Kenya endeavors to be a region of peace, to be a purveyor of peace within the region. No wonder we have so many. We have the Dadaab refugee camp, the Kakuma refugee camp. We welcome so many refugees on our soil because we are a haven of peace. Other countries within the region view us as a haven of peace.
And we even send our peace missions.
Exactly,
abroad.
where we send our soldiers in the army, we sent our police force to Haiti to go and pursue peace. We've sent our military on a number of UN peacekeeping missions. Kenya is always tapped by the UN requested to provide soldiers for peace, for peace missions, peacekeeping missions. So Kenya, our peace diplomacy, you see now, that peace diplomacy is our strategy, is a pillar for Kenyan foreign policy. So under it, matters peace, Kenya wants to be involved within the region, within the continent if possible, and globally. That's why you'll find Kenya going out of its way to try and be a haven for peace. We can have peace negotiations done here, send our soldiers. We reach out to warring countries and say, can we mediate? Or you can use our good offices, to help mediate the conflict. So foreign policy is as effective as how if a country is being able to achieve its agenda through that foreign policy. So from matters peace, we can say Kenya has been effective, all right? Another economic pillar we have is economic diplomacy. So Kenya has tried to, within the region, trade with Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan. We've tried at least to trade with our countries openly. And of course, whether we are very successful or not is a different story, but at least we allow them to import through our borders, through the Mombasa port. We buy things from them, they buy from us. We try and relate from matters from an economic perspective. So we can say we are effective in that sense. So any country in Africa that is able to achieve its objectives with its neighbors, we can say it's having effective foreign policy. So sometimes it backfires, sometimes there are differences, but yeah, we can say that is how you try and measure it.
Sometimes it's here and there.
Exactly.
And moving on, there is a country's individual interests and their regional blocks.
Yeah.
And there is foreign policy where countries have to relate.
Yeah.
How does this issue of being part of a regional bloc and achieving your interest as a country marry each other?
Thank you. That's a very nice question. Yeah, that is, there's something we say in we call in international relations, unilateralism versus multilateralism. Unilateralism is a country deciding and making decisions, ignoring the neighbors. And multilateralism is where you do things as a group, or you do things because of the region and with many other countries. All countries in the world have their own individual interests. Let us start there. If you do not do that, you're not a nation state. You're not an effective nation state. You have to first do things that benefit you as a country. You have got to approach all issues from the perspective of individual interest. Ideally, that is what happens. But sometimes there are certain issues that affect so many people, and you cannot handle that issue alone. So that's where now multilateralism comes in. That's where now regionalism comes in. For example, during 2020, the world experienced the COVID-19 pandemic. All right? Granted, it started from Asia, China specifically, and spread throughout the world. Now, countries of the world realize that this problem is bigger than one country to solve. So we have to unite as a globe. So regardless of your individual interests, you have to find out, how can I be part of the solution with the other countries of the world? But now I'll use COVID-19. I'll use COVID-19 as an example to answer your question. Now, if you want to see unilateralism, or if you want to see how a country protects its interests, even if it is supposed to be working with other countries, COVID-19 as a pandemic, you realize, if I allow these flights to come from Asia and land on my airport, I might risk spreading this disease. So what did many countries of the world do? They closed their airspace. They banned certain flights from certain regions and said, we do not want people to come from that part of the world. Not because we hate them, but we hate what they are carrying. And since they might be carriers of this pandemic, they will bring it to us. So nation states sometimes will close borders, will prevent these flights from coming, because we are protecting. In global health, in public health, we are protecting our citizens. If you open your borders arbitrarily, you're going to be in problems. I'll give you another example that just happened in Kenya some few weeks ago. There was a rumor that there was an outbreak of Ebola within the region. Ideally, I think it was in DRC, then I think affected our neighbor Uganda. Very easily, what does Kenya do? We raise awareness at our border points. We are almost on the verge of closing borders from people from certain nationalities. And remember, these are member states of the East African community. So we were supposed to be collaborating with them in the East African region. But you realize there are a clear and present danger to your public health. So sometimes you might close your border because you do not want the spread of Ebola to get to you. Or you might raise awareness, extra screening at the border points. Now that is a country now following its own interests and balancing with regional interests, because Kenya realizes, if we open our borders and allow this disease to come in, it is going to wreak havoc in our economy. It's going to wreak havoc in our public health. And then if we are weak, we are also going to spread the disease to our neighbors. So let's protect ourselves to protect the region. I know it's a paradox, and it's sometimes you don't see how this selfishness is really helping, but it does help. So nation states sometimes are caught between balancing individual interests and regional interests. That sometimes, and that's why you find sometimes a country does something that appears like it's going against regional interest, but in essence what this country is doing, it is protecting itself. I'll give another example, maybe not the very best, but it's out there. In the East African community, we have the Common Market Protocol. We have agreed we'll open our borders to trade with one another. But every once in a while, there are certain countries in the East African community sometimes refuse to agree, because they feel if they open their borders, they are going to be overwhelmed. The other countries will have a bigger advantage. We're going to go and trade and pick their goods, or Kenyans are going to go and get jobs in their countries. So it is not easy. And this is now international relations. This is now that balancing act, delicate balancing act, where a country has to balance its individual interests and regional interests. So sometimes a country is forced to become selfish when it feels that regional interests will be to its own detriment. And then sometimes countries sacrifice their interest and look at the bigger picture. They agree to do things as a bloc for the bigger picture, and it happens. So that's the dynamic world of international relations.
Thank you for elaborating that.
Yeah.
Can you give us a history of successive foreign policy governments in Kenya?
For successive foreign regimes and their foreign policies.
Yes.
So I'll say this, I was young, but what I've read in history, I look at Jomo Kenyatta, when we start with Jomo Kenyatta, the founding father of the country, the first president of the country, Jomo Kenyatta, he pursued a foreign policy. Number one, he lived during the time of the Cold War, where we had the West versus the East, where we had the US and the capitalist bloc, and we had the Soviet Union and the communist bloc. So Jomo Kenyatta existed at a time when the Cold War was hot, when the Cold War was fully in place. So he pursued a foreign policy he aligned with the West For most of the time, he aligned with the West, meaning with the America and the capitalist countries. That is the foreign policy he pursued. And then he also worked with like-minded. Kenya was also part of the non-aligned movement. So he worked with other countries that were trying to say, we do not want to get caught up in this Cold War. We don't want to be labeled as East or West, even though actually Jomo Kenyatta's foreign policy was mainly aligned to capitalist states and the Western Bloc. Why did he do that? Because he needed foreign aid to build the country. So that is exactly what he did, and to build our healthcare and all that. Then when we come to President Moi's regime, President Moi pretty much, he used to have this policy of fuata nyayo. So he pretty much followed what Jomo Kenyatta, his predecessor, had taught him. And Kenya still followed a lot of the West. It is during President Moi's time that now the Cold War collapsed. And then we had no choice. Communism collapsed. The Cold War ended in the 1990, 1991. And then President Moi now dealt with the brunt of the structural adjustment programs. Our Western friends now started forcing African countries to open up the democratic space, to introduce multi-partyism. So at that point, we can say Kenya's foreign policy at that point, yes, we still aligned with like-minded states, but largely because of the nature of the power that the United States and Western and Europe had over African countries, African governments opened up to multi-partyism, opened up their economies to allowing liberal markets where we don't have price controls. So President Moi deals still with the West. He pursues a lot of peace diplomacy during his time. His foreign policy was more on peace diplomacy. Kenya set a lot of troops, peacekeeping missions. Kenya helped to negotiate a lot of peace within the region. President Moi was known for that. And then when we came to President Kibaki, now we started seeing a shift in Kenya's foreign policy. President Kibaki started orienting Kenya's foreign policy and started looking towards the East. Why did he do that? He felt that the East provided a very nice alternative. So we started buying, Western goods were very expensive. Western things were very expensive. He realized we can get almost equal quality from the East, from China and the other countries. And that's when we started realizing now China started coming in, giving us these loans. They built the Thika Superhighway. So Kenya's foreign policy, remember I said foreign policy has continuity and change. You do not drop your old partners. So we still remain the friends of the West. But now we have brought on board, we are now embracing more Eastern friends from China, from the East. Why? Foreign policy has elements of continuity and change. So that was President Kibaki. He opened up the East to Kenya. China came, did a lot of infrastructure development. Under Kibaki's watch, we started getting loans from China and all that. And then we come to President Uhuru. President Uhuru largely amplifies what President Kibaki did. He now goes deeper into the East. So building the SGR, picking Chinese loans. But we are not, at the same time, we are still in the peace area. President Kibaki helped to negotiate the CPA agreement that brought peace in Sudan between the North and the South. That was under President Kibaki. That was in 2005, I remember, the CPA agreement. Uhuru continued with peace diplomacy, peace within the region. President Kibaki, we went into Somalia, I remember, Operation Linda Inchi. So pursuing our interests. So Uhuru looks towards the East, continues looking towards the East, also maintains his friends from the West. So Kenya is now open to both the East and the West. And in the current regime, so far I have seen maintenance of both. We have strengthened our relationship under President Ruto. We've strengthened our relationship with the West. Remember last year he went for that state visit to the US. He's done a lot of shuttle diplomacy and traveled to so many countries. This is how you build a country's foreign policy. When you visit, when you create partnerships and relationships, that is you extending your foreign policy. You're bringing in more friends to the board. And so he's continued to do it with the West and with the East. And that's where we find ourselves. Yeah.
I was once in a meeting with the government spokesman Isaac Mwaura,
Yeah.
and he said that we're going to have a tanga policy. A layman would ask, don't you have principles? And he clearly brought it out that we are going to protect Kenya's interest as long as it's also serving us.
Yeah.
How would you rate that? And in addition to that, how would you rate and analyze the current government's foreign policy?
All right. Yeah. So coming back to that tanga policy, I think he was just trying to say, that was his clever way of saying Kenya is going to align itself with whoever is helping Kenya's interest.
Exactly.
So the tanga policy, I think, if I'm to interpret what he was trying to say, Kenya will be a friend of whoever is helping our interests.
Exactly.
Kenya will align with whoever is aligning with Kenya's interest at any given time. So he was cleverly trying to say, don't blame us if you find us going to the east. It's because there's something we want from the east and our interests are aligned. If you find us in the west, it's because our interests are aligned. So tanga policy for him, I think that was layman's way of just saying Kenya will pursue its own interest with whoever outside there. Creating the current government's foreign policy. Remember, there are elements of continuity and change. We can only rate it probably towards the end of the regime. But so far, if you are to look at it, we can say we've had hits and misses. Hits and misses meaning there are places we are getting it right, and then there are places where we are wobbling. But remember, we are all learning, okay? In foreign policy, your friends today could be your enemies tomorrow because your interests are not aligned. So currently, I think Kenya is in the murky waters of trying to understand who are our friends, who are our true friends. We're discovering the hard way that we can burn our fingers. If we do certain things, we are going to burn our fingers. And there are certain things that have happened within the region recently that have exposed Kenya, left us exposed, that are going to cost us dearly going forward. And I think the government needs to realign itself. And I think it is quickly going to realign itself because also we do not want to, there's a saying that there are some trees, there are trees that take like 100 years to grow out there in the Amazon jungle or in the Congo forest. But it only takes 2 hours of dedicated cutting with a power saw to destroy them. It's very easy if you're not careful, to make diplomatic blunders that can literally destroy what has taken generations to build. So I think Kenya is in that space of trying to, number one, safeguard its interests and making sure we do not destroy what has been painstakingly built by our predecessors. And at the same time, also trying to position itself to try and get new friends and getting people who align with what we are looking for right now. So right now, if you ask me on a balancing scale, to talk about Kenya's foreign policy, we are on a balance. There are places where we've done well, and there are places where we've been left wanting because of some hits and what I'd call hits and misses. So we are still in that purview of continuity and change, and we need to seriously reevaluate what's happening. And how do you reevaluate? The reaction you're getting from outside. How do you know whether your foreign policy is working or not? The feedback you're getting from outside. If you get negative feedback, you know there's something you're doing that is not right.
And we're getting that at this time?
Yes, we are currently getting. We're still in the learning curve. We are still in that purview of trying to find our place, find our balance. Now, if you look at all those things, for example, yes, that was a diplomatic blunder, allowing M23 to come and the AFS, the VIGA, the Congo, the Alliance for Congo, the Congo River Alliance, to come and launch from our soil. Because Kenya appeared like we have taken sides. Ideally, this is what I'll say, and I will not discount the fact that probably these people did not really tell the government what they were planning to do. They just showed up and said, probably didn't even tell anyone. They just entered, got their visas, congregated, called the press conference, or launched their own alliance. Because if they had gone through the DRC embassy in Kenya, the DRC embassy, I'm sure, would have alerted the Kenyan government and told them, we have these people and this might be their agenda. Then probably Kenya would have stepped in and done something. So we were caught flat-foot there, and that was a diplomatic blunder. The RSF recently, just the other day, Sudan is fighting. There are 2 factions fighting in Sudan: the Burhan faction, the SAF, the current leaders of Sudan, and the RSF, the former Janjaweed, now called RSF. They recently, just this past week, made a statement launching something, and it created heat for Kenya. So those are some of the things that we've done that have made people and our diaspora, and one of our pillars is diaspora diplomacy. Kenya is worried and concerned about what our Kenyan nationals abroad are doing, what they are doing and how they are being treated, and how they can be the face of Kenya in whichever countries they are in. So under diaspora diplomacy, that negative feedback that we are getting is trying to tell Kenya, reorient your priorities. What are you doing? You are costing us. You are costing us relationships outside there. You're doing certain things within the country that are painting us in bad light outside there. So, yeah, we have all these things. Sending our soldiers to Haiti received a lot of heat. It was a mixed bag. On one side, there was a group that was arguing that when Kenya goes out there, we are going to become prominent. We will be counted as a nation that can be relied on. We will be reinforcing our peace diplomacy pillar in Kenya's foreign policy. And there was another side that was saying Kenya is not equipped to handle that fight because the US had tried, Brazil had tried, the UN has tried. The problem is not getting solved in Haiti. So, so Kenya is sending our troops, and because our soldiers are already, our police officers are in Haiti, it's to pray that they do the right thing outside there, okay? Because we now can't again just pull them out like that, hoping the UN steps in and takes up that mission, because I understand that mission, the funding for that mission is in October this year, around September, October this year. So the question becomes, will Kenya continue putting its soldiers there if we are told the finances are not there? What are we going to do about it? So, yeah, these are hits and misses in our foreign policy. And I think every president has his own priorities, has what he feels his administration needs to present, but they should be guided by the pillars, the 5 pillars of Kenya's foreign policy, and to understand my vision and mission for the country. Where do they align with Kenya's foreign policy? Because this is one individual and there is Kenya nation, the state. So you should not allow your personal the things you want to do to go against what Kenya stands for. I think that's the point where now Kenyan presidents and African presidents need to be oriented by their respective ministries of foreign affairs. That these are Kenyan interests. And now, how does your vision and mission, how do your election pledges fit into this agenda of the country? So it's a very delicate balance, around that area.
Right.
Yeah.
So from all you have said, what are the takeaways we can take from Raila's AUC bid and the results we saw thereafter?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very good question. So Raila's AUC bid, and the Kenyan candidate Raila lost to Mahmoud Yusuf from Djibouti. Number one, the takeaway is, if you look at the voting patterns, it means within Africa, and these are just lessons for the entire continent, within Africa, Africa is still divided along regional blocks and language. Those are 2 divisive factors within Africa. In the sense that Francophone countries voted for the Djibouti candidate because he's French speaking. A number of Anglophone countries voted for Raila because he's English speaking. That is one layer. The other layer, and nobody wants to talk about it, is the religious layer. The religious layer, Muslim-speaking countries, where Islam is the official religion, voted for the Djibouti candidate.
But we have had AUC chairpersons who are not Muslim.
Yeah, because at that point, that was only one.
2, I know of 2. And Nkosazana.
Jinping.
Yes.
But now remember, Jinping was supported by what bloc? The blocs he's coming from. So he still got, I think, the Francophone vote. That's where the bulk of his voting came from. So language, religion, those are very big. All right? Dlamini was able to do it, but the Francophone countries frustrated her until she only did 1 term. She could not continue, so she dropped out. So Africa is divided along. There's a language barrier. Those neocolonial boundaries, they still a lot of integration needs to happen. That's number 1. 2, Kenya, I am sure, learned, and in hindsight, now that we can do this post-mortem, that you need to be careful about the pronouncements and the positions you take on some issues, because all those things will come to bite you.
They are on record.
They are on record. Right now, if we are seen to support the RSF, all right, if Kenya is seen to support the RSF, and eventually the RSF is defeated, and Burhan's faction takes over the Sudan government, you can be assured Kenya and Sudan's relationship gets destroyed. Already they have recalled the ambassador. And in that act of recalling that ambassador, it already sends a diplomatic signal that we are not severing, but our relationship is cold. Yeah. So Kenya's ambassador in Khartoum is also not in a good place. Definitely, probably by now, I've not yet caught up with what has happened to our ambassador in Khartoum. Probably he's already been recalled or he moved out when they started fighting. So there's something in diplomacy we call retortion. Nation states can retaliate. They can protest, and they protest by pulling out their ambassador. They may not close down the embassy. I mean, by the time they close down an embassy, it means that relationship cannot be repaired. But by recalling the ambassador, it's already a very strong diplomatic protest. We've already voiced protest that we are not happy with how you're running things. We're not happy with the position you have taken on an issue that is of interest to us. So we need to be careful right now. We need to repair. Kenya has a lot to do in repairing its relationship with the region. Number one, with SADC. Why did we lose the SADC vote? Because Kenya was seen to take a position on the DRC issue. By allowing that DRC alliance, that Congo Alliance, River Alliance to launch in Kenya, and the fact that Kenya looked like it was protecting or siding with President Kagame, who Tshisekedi from DRC claimed is a problem. And Tshisekedi, remember, DRC is a member of the East African Community and a member of SADC. So SADC took a position against Kenya. It was a protest vote against Kenya. So it may not be about Raila Odinga, the candidate. It is about the position that Kenya took on some of these issues. So going forward, Kenya needs to go back to the drawing board, repair its relationship with, number one, the East African Community. An interesting thing, Kenya is a member of IGAD. There's an organization called the IGAD. Djibouti is a member of IGAD. Ethiopia is a member of IGAD. Eritrea is a member of IGAD. Sudan is a member of IGAD. All right, Uganda is a member of IGAD, South Sudan, Kenya. There's a list that was going on around the internet this past week, showing the countries that voted for Raila Odinga and the countries that voted for Yusuf. Do you know a number of countries from IGAD voted for Yusuf? And Kenya is a member of IGAD, and we are all members of IGAD. So Kenya needs to now go back to the drawing board to repair its relationship with anywhere Kenya is a member of. It needs, number one, to cement its relationship with those people. So in the EAC, we need to be on good terms with everybody in the EAC. Then we go to IGAD, we should be in good terms with everybody in IGAD. Then now we reach out to SADC.
Apologize?
Probably, I don't know, I don't use the word apologize. Just repair. You don't have, sometimes also apologizing makes you look very weak. So in diplomacy, in diplomacy, you repair your relationship with that other country and tell them, quietly tell them, it was a misunderstanding. This was our perspective. At this time, we thought this was the best way of doing things. We are sorry if we hurt your feelings. You really don't tell them you're sorry, but you make them understand why you took this particular position. And they will understand, because all countries have positions. When Kenya wakes up one day and supports Israel over Palestine, Kenya is entitled to take that stand as a nation state because of Kenya's bilateral relations with Israel. If somebody else takes offense to that, your work as a diplomat in diplomacy, in foreign policy and diplomacy, is to go and make that other country understand your position. You agree to disagree, but remain friends. Because again, you don't want Kenya to wake up and abandon Israel. We can't do that. We are going to jeopardize years and years of cultivated relationship with Israel. So we cannot do that as a nation state. But we can make everybody else who has a contrary view understand where Kenya is coming from. And we get to the point of agreeing to disagree, because that is what international relations is all about. You don't always have to see things from the same level and the same perspective. You respect each other's opinion and ask, for example, if Edgar and Esther cannot agree on this issue, are there other issues that we agree on that we can use to maintain our friendship and we go forward? Because, every nation state has the right to have its own view on any issue. So you can't punish people. It's like me punishing you because you have a contrary opinion to what I believe in. So you are entitled to your opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion. That's why we, as civilized people, we agree to disagree. And I tell you, Esther, I hear you. I may not agree with what you're saying, but I see where you're coming from. I respect your viewpoint. You respect my viewpoint. So you measure You major on bigger things. You stop majoring on the minors. You stop majoring on the things that make you different. You major on those things that bring you together as nation states. Yes, we don't agree on climate change. We don't agree on this. Are there things that we agree on? Let's major on the majors and then slowly see how can we close ranks on these things that we believe we are pulling in different directions. And I think that's what you do.
All right.
Yeah.
We have seen some local leaders. The recent video I saw was by Didmas Baraza in his area constituency, telling the residents that one, the votes were rigged. That's funny. The AUC votes were rigged.
Yeah.
And he also said that he's going to appeal for Kenya to pull out of the AU. And I have heard that backing from other local leaders. So 2 questions. One, how effective is that possible? Yes, it's possible. But how effective is that AU? How effective is or was that AUC position going to be for Kenya?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very nice question. Number one, I did an interview some 3 months ago. At a forum, I said that the Djibouti candidate had a huge advantage. And I was advising the Kenyan government at that point to concentrate more on the Francophone countries and the Arabic-speaking nations. I was saying, let's do more campaigning along that side. Let's try and persuade those blocks and those countries more. Because the Anglophones, it's easier to talk to them. So I said that I could see this coming. The Djibouti candidate had everything stacked in his favor. The fact, unfortunately, the diplomatic blunder of the M23 issue, the debacle and all, and how the perception and misperception about the handling of the M23 issue in DRC, in Eastern Congo, that also cost us some bit of votes. But largely, to Honorable Baraza, I don't know whether he was speaking in the heat of the moment. If he really sat down and did a cost-benefit analysis, Kenya stands to lose more by even attempting to say we are walking away from the African Union. Why would you be walking away from the African Union because your candidate lost? That, in my view, is very unwise. All right, it's not well thought out too. And I don't even think the Foreign Affairs in Kenya would even, I'm sure they just allowed him to speak as a politician. They would not take it anywhere. And then I also heard another politician say that he's going to petition the East African community to pull out of the African Union.
Yes, that also.
Yeah, so it can't work. It can't work because the East African community has other states inside. If it is Kenya feeling aggrieved, Tanzania is not feeling aggrieved, Uganda is not aggrieved, South Sudan is not aggrieved, Somalia is not aggrieved, Burundi, Rwanda, they are not aggrieved. So if Kenya wants to move out of the African Union, you move out alone. Examples of countries that have moved out of the African Union at some point was Morocco, because they were having some internal issues with the Sahrawi region, and they felt that like nobody was understanding them, so in protest they pulled out. But they later on applied to come back. The 3 states of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, because those 3 countries experienced coups, so military leaders took over, and they were sanctioned. ECOWAS and the African Union really sent strong protests telling them, we want democratically elected governments in place. So those countries threatened to walk out of the African Union. I think they applied to do that. For you to walk out of the African Union and you're a country in Africa, you stand to lose more than gain, because no country is an island. Remember, it's called international relations because you are dealing anything outside your border, you're in the purview of international relations. So you stand to lose more by walking out of this continental body that is protecting you, shielding you, and representing you in global politics. By virtue of being a member of the African Union, other African countries, there's a way they relate with you nicely. I'll give you the example of the UK. The UK pulled out of the European Union through Brexit. And after a number of years, 1-2 years, right now there is a clamor. There is a clamor by a huge part of the population within the UK that we want to rejoin the European Union. Because Scotland, under Great Britain, Scotland, is there saying, this thing is not working for us. So if you walk out of these continental bodies, we call them international societies, the African Union, the European Union, there are very many benefits of integration that you get when you're part of the union.
than
when you are alone. Yeah, because now I think those statements probably were made in the heat of the pain they were going through, the disappointment they went through because our candidate Raila Odinga did not make it. But that is an extremely drastic measure to take. You do not walk out of the union because your candidate lost. You go back to the drawing board and ask, how can I best convince the continent that we have a candidate who has something to offer?
What would have Kenya gained? What would it have gained if Raila won the AUC position?
Thank you. That's a very good question. If Raila had become the AUC chair, number one, Kenya would have gotten a lot of diplomatic mileage. Kenya's standing in the diplomatic world would have been elevated by virtue of the fact that he is the one who is up there. When people talk about the African Union, who is the African Commission chair, when they hear it's a Kenyan, it automatically brings up Kenya in everyone's mind. That's number one. Number two, Africa is pursuing the United Nations. Right now, there's a clamor for reforms of the United Nations. And one of the areas there's been a lot of debate about is the United Nations Security Council. The UN Security Council is very powerful. And from the time the UN was created in 1945 till now, only 5 countries are in the Security Council. We're talking about the US, Britain, France, China, and Russia. People have been saying Africa, with its population of over 1.2 billion people, needs to at least be included. And not only Africa, other regions of the world want to be included. So there is that push to give Africa 2 positions. If these 2 positions are able to be obtained if, for example, when Raila was the AUC chair, he would have helped to push that agenda. It would have brought accolades to Kenya, not only to him as an individual and his legacy, but also to Kenya as the country that was at the helm of the AUC when Africa was given 2 permanent seats at the United Nations Security Council. So that is big. You can't take away from just how much that would help Kenya win globally. And then, of course, basically Kenya, any agenda that, definitely anything like regional peace and security, the DRC conflict, the conflict in Somali, those are some of the things that he would have helped to fast track. Because yes, he is the AUC chair, his agenda is the entire African Union and the entire of Africa, but he'd have kept a close eye on things that Kenya requires.
And lastly, Doc, are there regional blocs that are stronger than others in Africa?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely. We are not all at the same level. There are some that are more advanced or more integrated than others. Like the SADC bloc is very close-knit. ECOWAS in West Africa is also quite strong, other than the loss that they had of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger the other day. Yeah, and also the EAC is we're also catching up. We have our own internal issues because of our own regional integration, because of our common market protocol that has been a stumbling block. We've not, in the East African bloc, fully opened up our borders to allow intra-trade among ourselves, because certain countries are still protecting their economies and they still feel the economies are a bit fragile. So we are not fully integrated. And a regional bloc is only as strong as the unity of its member states. So if you're not united in your bloc, it means if you're not united as nations within your bloc, it means your bloc cannot be as powerful. So SADC is quite strong, yes.
And how is AU beneficial to its member states when they can't even call sanction for members who are going against violation of human rights? What other international bodies do? Thank you.
Actually, the only international bloc that usually does that a lot, has that power, is the European Union. The European Union is a supranational international organization. Supranational means the member states, the comprising members of the EU, have agreed to give up some of their rights as nation states to this international organization so that it can call them to order, so that it can organize them and make them do certain things. The difference between the EU and the African Union is, and the African Union was made modeling itself after the EU. When the AU was being launched and made, we really copied a lot from the EU. We hoped we would get to where the EU was. But the problem with African states, African countries do not want to give up their sovereignty, parts of their sovereignty, to the African Union. That is why the AU cannot sanction its member states. The African Union behaves like it is even afraid of its member states, because if it is too hard on them, they will pull out. They will say, we no longer want to be members. We will not pay our membership. We no longer want to be members.
And they even struggle to pay their membership.
Yes, that's another problem. That's another issue, because the bulk of the African Union budget is funded by the EU and countries like China and our development partners outside there. So African member states do not pay up their membership fees, the subscription fees on time. And if the organization does not have enough finances to run most of the projects and most of the things it wants to do, it means it weakens it globally. It weakens it overall. Its effectiveness is weakened. And now, of course, and then remember, in the African Union, it is the Assembly of Heads of States. It is the African presidents who form the main decision-making organ. And they will do things that protect them. They will not want to sanction someone who is violating human rights in his country. They will not want to, because they are afraid. It's an exclusive big boys club.
Yes.
Yeah. So they do not want to sanction each other, because they are like, tomorrow it will be me. If I do it today, tomorrow it will be me. So we are caught up in our regional politics, our domestic politics, and it ends up affecting the continental body called the African Union. That's why it's not very effective.
Right.
Yeah.
With all that said, what would be your parting shot for today's conversation?
My parting shot is that Africa, we are a work in progress. There is still, I'm an Afro optimist. I believe that Africa has a lot of potential. I believe that Africa has a long way to go, but we can get there. We need to work on our African unity more. We need to speak with one voice as Africa. That's from the continental perspective. Coming back to Kenya, we are a very strong country, respected globally, regionally, and within the continent. These small diplomatic mistakes we have made, these faux pas, as they are called, that we have made, we can learn from them. The Kenyan government can still pick itself up and still reposition itself as the strongest diplomatic hub within the region, and Kenya can go forward.
All right.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, there we have it, ladies and gentlemen, from the expert's point of view. And if you haven't subscribed to this YouTube channel, click that subscribe button, like, comment, and let us interact in the comment section. You can also mention what guests you love to see on this show and what topics you would like addressed on this show. Until next time, see you and goodbye.